So we'll start over here in Moed Katen on 26b. Zog the Gemara, Pligi bo Rab Masno Maruko. In the following halacha, we have a disagreement between Rab Masna Marukva. They are disagreeing. A lot of times, because this was the oral Torah, it was transmitted orally. They didn't remember exactly who said what. So sometimes you have in the Gemara, we know that there was a disagreement between Ramasna and Umar Ukva. We don't really know who said what, but we know they were disagreeing about the following. But Vitarvayu Mishmei Dabua Dushmul Velevi. They were both quoting this in the name of Shmuel's father and Levi, and they're both saying their disagreement, and they're both quoting Shmuel's father and Levi as the source for them. What is their disagreement? Chad Omar, one says, Kol Shiva Koireya. If you are sitting Shiva, and then it happens that during Shiva, there's another person that you have to do Kriya, you have to render your garments again. You cannot just add to the rip that you already have. You'd have to make a new rip. So, Kol Shiva, if it's during the Shiva, during the 7 days, and you have to render your garments, is Koireya. Then you have to make a new rip. Rashi, the Kol Shiva, during the 7 days. Im meis loy meis, if somebody dies in the family, koireya kriya acheres, then you would have to rip another kriya. What happens le'achar shiva after the 7 days? Once the shiva has gone through, so now you don't have to make a whole new kriya. You can just add to the Kriya over here. I want to take this, I want to go out of this particular, I don't like this one. I'm just going to go, give me a second. I'm going to go to here. Okay. Let's see. Just went to this. Okay, so what's the logic behind this? So that's one la'achar shiva. If you're after the 7 days, so then moisif, then you can just add. Then you don't need to. You can add to the rip that is there already. During the 7 days, you must make a new rip for the new mourning that you have to do. After Shiva, you don't have to make a new Kriya. You can add to the first rip. The Chadomar, and one says no, Kol Shloshim. During the first 30 days, Koreya, then you have to rip. A new rip. Not only 7 days, but after all Shloshim, you have to make a new rip. La'achar Shloshim, but after Shloshim, Moisif, so then you add. Okay. So the Gemara. So one says during the 7 days you must make a new rip, and the other one says during Shloshim. And the Gemara is going to challenge, Rab Zeta is going to challenge each one of these opinions. Matkiv lo Rab Zeta. So he wants to know what's the logic, why during the 7 days, the first opinion. Man da Omar kol shiva koireya amai. What would be the logic of the person who says that during the 7 days, you would have to render the garment? What would be his reasoning? So we'll say because the loy nitan Since during the 7 days, you can't even make the big stitches, gather up the ribs to gather them up, not to sew them, but even to gather them up. You can't gather them up during Shiva. So therefore, you're not going to be able to tell that you made a new rip. It just looks like a continuation of the previous rip. So you're not Mekayim the mitzvah of Kriya for the new mourners that you have over there. Mela, after 30 days, since you can sew it up already, so then once you gather it together, you make a new rip, you can tell it's a new rip. That's why it's okay. But in the first 7 days, you're not going to be able to tell. Let's look at the Rashi. So he says like this: Man da Omar kol shiva karei amai. The one who says that during the shiva you must make a new kriya. What's his reasoning? The loinitan l'shoyleloi, because you can't sew it together, so you're not going to be able to tell the new rip. Zok the Rashi loinitan l'shoyleloi toich shiva klal. During shiva you can't even gather it up. The moisif bay, and if you add to a rip that was there, mirzik kera echad, that appears to be just like one rip. You can't tell that you ripped it again. Aval shiva, but after shiva, the kvar shaluloi, that he's already connected, because the assumption is after shiva you can sort of gather it together. You don't have to wear the rip. So now korea kol hashalilis, then you can rip all those gathered together that you gathered it together. All those stitches that you put it together. Umoisiv kolshu, and then you add just a drop. The minkar dames achar korea. Now you can tell that you are ripping it for another mace. I don't know if he realizes that his camera is on. Stephen, I don't know if you want your camera to be on, but your camera is on. So he says, and therefore, Abel La'achar Shiva. So he says, so what's your reasoning? During Shiva, since you're not allowed to put it together at all, so if you're going to add a rip, you're not going to be able to tell. But after Shiva, when you gather it together, you can cut the gatherings and you can add a little bit to it, and then you can tell that it's for somebody else. That's what we do. So he says, so in that case, Elahodom or Mar, but Mars, before we said that Ha'isha shoylelosei la'alter, a woman, for modesty reasons, even though that she ripped it, she's able to gather it together immediately. So it would turn out by a woman who can gather it together, maybe over there it would turn out that you should be able to do the Kriya a second time, because since it's gathered together, you can rip it and add a little bit, and that would be even during Shiva, right? It says, so Ishla afilu tech Shiva. So he says, Hochanami. So over here should also be the din, the Moisif. Why? The Koirei Hashlila, he can rip the gathered together that he gathered the stitch together. Umoisif Bapurto, he adds a little bit. The Kominkar. And you can tell. But the question is, the Kopasi, because he ruled before Kol Shiva Korea, that during Shiva you must rip Vafilu Isha, even if you had already, you didn't make a distinction and say, well, by a woman that can put together, immediately you can go ahead and add, even during Shiva. You didn't say anything like that. So that means that it's across the board, and that even if a woman is included. So if the reason is because you can't tell only after you gather it together, so a woman that gathers it together immediately that we allow, you should be allowed to therefore cut it even during Shiva, because since she gathered it together, and you'll cut it in that, and that'll be, so why does the why do they say that you have to? Why does the person say Shiva? Why does it say during Shiva you need to do Kriya? It doesn't make a distinction. It doesn't say by a woman you don't have to. The Gemara says no. The truth of the matter is, even a woman's garment, even though she put it together, you're not going to be Yotze Kriya because technically that's an additional step that the Chachamim allowed. That's not min hadin. Also mishum kvoid ishu. It's the honor of the woman not to go around with a ripped clothing, and therefore kvoid of loy min hadin, and therefore we're not going to say that you make to do because you're not really allowed to be shoylulit. I mean, even though you do it for the kvoid isha, and therefore we're not going to change the halacha. And during Shiva, you would have to make a new rip, because even in a case where she did put it together, that's not the halacha. The halacha strictly is she shouldn't put it together. So you can't yotze with just adding. You have to wait till after Shiva. Okay. Now we ask the question, Man de Omar kol shloshim koideyam. So, Amai, what is the reasoning of the opinion that says that you have to wait for 30 days? But during 30 days, you have to make a new kriya. If you have another mace, you have to make a new kriya. What's his reasoning? Because during the 30 days, the leinitan la'achoyser, you can't really tie it together. So sew it together. After shloishim, you sew it together. We're not talking about a father and a mother. The halacha is that you never, but technically after shloishim, by ordinary people, for a brother, for any of the other avelim, you can sew it together after shloishim. You can sew it together. So, what's the reason the Gemara thinks why during shloishim you have to make a new kriya? Because if it's not sewn together, you can't really tell that it's added to it. Only after you sew it together, then you can make a new kriya. So the gather of shloshim is lanit lachos. So the Gemara asks, Elul aviv uleimai. This doesn't know, but his father and the mother lanit lachos lo'olam. We learned before by a father and mother, you're not allowed to sew together the kriya forever. So in that case, hachinami. So then, after shloishim, you should also not be allowed to add to the kriya. You'd have to make it. You should have to make a new kriya because you can never sew it together. If the only reason you can make a kriya is when you sew it together, and since by the father and mother you don't sew it together because the Chacham said it has to remain ripped all the time. And you can't sew together, ochinami. So we should say, taka by a father or mother, you would not be allowed to sew it together. You're not allowed to rip it again after 30 days for another mace, but we don't find such a distinction. It didn't say by it just said clearly that after 30 days, in all cases, you could use it to make another rip. And the Gemara answers, Hosom mishum koved aviv v'imayu. Over there, it's a special halacha. It's because of the honor of his father and mother. And v'lo min haddin, and it's not by halacha, which means you're allowed to really sew together ikir haddin. V'havi ki ichui, and that is like you sew it together, even though lepoil we don't do it. Lefikach moisi boy la'achar shloshim. It is, you could ask, it's as if you sewn it together and you can add after shloshim. Not sure exactly, but if he's not allowed to sew it together, how are you going to be able to tell? But he says the fact that you're allowed to, that is as if it's sewn together. Okay, after 30 days, now it's no longer. Now, if you add, it's like doing a new thing. That's why you can add to it after 30 days. Okay.
So that's adding to the existing rip, not starting a new rip. Okay.
Exactly. That will do it. Zog the Gemara, Ton Rabbanan. We learned in Abraisa. Hayoytze bebeged korua lifnei hames. If you go out with a ripped garment, you just don't have a good garment, so your garment has a rip on it. And in front of the mace, you're wearing your ripped garment. Now people think, oh, you ripped it for the person who died. But the truth is, it was ripped from before. So the Brisa says, you are actually robbing the dead and the living. The dead you're robbing, obviously you didn't do kriya for them. But the living you're robbing is because you're pretending that you ripped it for him and you didn't really, so you're cheating them. You're robbing them from really knowing that you didn't do it because they come to the conclusion. Rashi, the beged karua, koin lokain. This garment was ripped from before. So the person who does that, it goes a lakoil. He is actually cheating everyone. Why? He's cheating everybody. He's showing to them that he rendered on the mace because he's wearing this garment and it looks like he ripped for the mace. I mean, again, what happens if he only has a ripped garment and what happens if he's not a relative? I know all the different halachas, but just the general concept to appear as if you ripped the garment, that would be stealing both from the mace and also from the living because they are under the impression that you're actually rendering the garment for their mace that is before them. Okay. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, he says an interesting halacha here. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel says, one who says to his friends, Hashileni chalukach ve'elech ve'avakir es abba shehu choyle. I want you to borrow me your shirt so that I can go and visit my father who is sick. Didn't have a garment, so he asks his friend to borrow him his garment. B'holach, so he goes, umotzoi shemes, and he finds that he died. Now, normally, if you have your own garment, you would have to do kriya. And if you do kriya in your own garment, you're not allowed to sew it together. But in this case, because it's not his garment, he is allowed to rip it, and he can sew it together. And when he comes back home, now I guess he's going to sew together after Shiva or after Shloshim, whenever he's going to get to it. But when he comes back home, he gives him back his shirt. He gives him the money for the valuation of the shirt. It's a shirt that has a ripped and sewn together. It's not as valued as a non-ripped shirt, so he has to pay him for it. This only is if he tells him, give me your shirt, and I'm going to go visit my father who is sick. In other words, he's expecting that he might have to use, it's understood that he was telling him that I might have to use your shirt to do the kriya. But the idea, if he didn't let him know that he's that he's going to visit his father, then you're not allowed to touch it. You're not allowed to rip somebody else's garment. It's a mitzvah in you, but you're not allowed to steal. If you told him and he gave you, the assumption is that he allowed you to do kriya on that garment, but you caused him damage because it's worth less. You have to pay for it. But if you didn't tell him, then you're not allowed to rip his garment. Now there's an interesting thing, and also we're talking about the Rebbe's birthday today, Yud Aleph Nisan, and not only did the Rebbe change the entire landscape of Jewish life in America and the world over through the Rebbe's hard work and labor, an unbelievable change in Yiddishkeit, but the Rebbe also taught us a lot of the way one should do things the right way. So we know that we're going to learn now the halacha. Let's first do the halacha, and then I'll tell you. Tamer Rabbanon, we learn the Braisa. Choyle shemeis loy meis. A person who is sick and somebody died, ein medin oisu shemeis. If he's sick, you're not gonna, don't tell him that he died because he's already sick. And if you tell him that the person died, we worry Shema Titorav died to Olav. He may go crazy because of the pain that this person died, his relative died. So you're not allowed to let him know. And not only that, ve'ein mekarin befonov. Other people cannot do ripping of the garments in front of him. And further, mishatkinas anoshim befonov. You silence the women in front of that person so that they shouldn't be moaning and groaning and crying. You silence them because you don't want the sick person to pick up on it. And the Rebbe had a brother who lived in Liverpool in England. And when he passed away, the Rebbe made sure that his mother, who was frail and went through all the service from Russia and came home, the Rebbe made sure that she wouldn't know about her son's death. The Rebbe was worried his mother won't be able to handle it, exactly what we learn over here. The Rebbe went through great deals of efforts, as example, painting his sneakers that he wore during Shiva black so his mother wouldn't be able to tell that it's not his shoes. He would go as far as sending Shana Tova cards that his brother would send to his mother all the time. He forged them and made it sound like it's his. All, like we say here, Mishatkes, the Rebbe begged, made sure that nobody will tell his mother that his mother should not find out, because the Rebbe was worried for her health, which is the halacha that we learned. And the Rebbe was championed also in honoring his mother and taking care, as well as in all other areas. And the Rebbe's birthday today is the greatest gift to our generation, because the Rebbe had to face a generation of apathy and ignorance. You know, it's different. Sometimes when people oppose your Yiddishkeit, they don't let you do mitzvahs, so that brings out in you a fighting spirit. But when they are ignorant and they don't pay attention, that could be even worse. Rebbe talks about the 4 sons that come to the table. The evil son, at least he comes to the table, at least he challenges you. He says, why are you doing this? But he's speaking. But if a person doesn't even, the child never comes to the table, you don't even get an opportunity. He just doesn't know, never heard about a Seder. He's not asking questions. That's even worse. And the Rebbe reached out to those children and wanted to make sure that they have. Anyways, so this is the halacha, that if a person is sick, you try to see to it that he doesn't find out. A minor doesn't have to do kriya, is a minor who is a mourner, but we do kriya for him. Why? Because this will cause people to feel bad. That's good. So people should see a young child who lost somebody that they're mourning for. Another halacha is v'koirin al chomo val chamoisei. Because of honor of your wife, even though it's not your parents, but it's your wife's parents, that's your father-in-law and your mother-in-law, you do kriya because of the honor of his wife. We don't do it today, but I'm just saying that's the brought down over here, that even for them you do kriya. Then Ba'amar Apapa, this is another. Apapa says, Tona Be'evil Rabochas, that Rabosi, that's the Mesachta Smochis. It says, Avaloy Yaniach Tinek B'toicheke, not to put a child in the lap of a mourner. Why? The child brings him to laughter. He'll be being, the people will speak bad and say, look, he's not mourning, he's having fun, he's not really upset. Look, he's playing with a baby. So not to place a baby in his lap during the time of the mourning over there. So that's the addition that Rapapa said. Okay. Zokter be'ein mevarin al mitos kufis. So the Mishnah says that Nevarim, that's the first meal that you bring them. So you don't do it on beds that are raised up. The beds have to be lying down. And meaning that's the sign of mourning, like to us by sitting on a small chair. Zog the Gebraise, Ton Rabbonon, we learned in the Braise, Ahoylech Libeis Ha'ovel, one who's going to the mourner's house. And Im Hoyo Libe Gasboy. So he's going to give the Sudas Havra, and if he was like, very comfortable, he wasn't upset, so we want to do more things to get him to feel. So Yavru al mitus kfuyas. So then you should give him the food on beds that are bent, meaning that will help the person get into the mood of it. Yavru la'oisoi shabo al mitus kfuyas. So the one that comes to the base of Ovel, they should help us to do it on the bed, on beds that are bent, on the lower place. But in lav, but if he's not, he's broken already, you don't have to break him. Yavru al mitas kufis, then you can give him on the mitas kufis. So I'm not sure exactly. What did we learn before in the Mishnah? Let me just see here what the Mishnah said. Let's see. So there, I'm trying to find. Oh, the Mishnah said. So those people that come sit on a high bed, the people. But Rashi says Yoshua Menachemim. But the others, but when you come, unless you need to be sort of subdued yourself, so that's when you'd also sit on a small bed. That's what the Gemara says here. Rava Isra Bei Milsa. So the Gemara relates a story that the Rava, something happened, somebody died. Abba Bar Marta. So it came up to comfort him. Abba Bar Marta, do Abba Bar Menyumi. That's Abba Bar Marta is the same Abba Bar Menyumi. So Rava Zokif. So Rava raised up his bed, and Abba Bar Marta coffee. Abba Bar Marta, he sat on a bent bed. Omar, so Rava said, Kamel lays beidaita lights Rabbonon. He doesn't pay attention, this rabbi, this Abba Bar Marta doesn't pay attention because he went and he raised so that to show that you don't have to be sitting down when you're doing the mevarim, those who are comforting, you don't have to sit down. But he went and he bent, so he says he's not getting it. I raised up, so he shouldn't have. He shouldn't have had to bend. He didn't have to do that. Zodi Gemara Tana Rabbana, within the Braise. One who goes from place to place. He's on the road, and something happens. What do we do? If he can diminish his business where he's on a trip, he should diminish. But if he can't totally stop, he's in the middle of a business trip, he should go ahead and do business not by himself, but together with his whole chabur. Okay, I know I'm making it short because I want to go downstairs, Chapa Ma'ariv, and I wish everybody a kosher Freilich Pesach, and should be real freedom. and we should all experience no more worries, and true simcha, true joy should be zman cheruseinu. Everybody have a chag kosher v'sameach, a good yontif, and see everybody the week after Pesach.
Chag kosher v'sameach.
Chag Sameach. Thank you very much, Rabbi.